Welcome to this video. Today, you're going to learn all about formatting and punctuation in English so you can make sure you're using the correct rules and your writing looks professional and impresses whoever's reading it. Now, this is a full workshop, so it's a longer video, and we're going to go in depth in these topics, and you're going to see them as examples. So we're going to review an email, and we're going to look at all the formatting and punctuation mistakes in this email, and then I'll teach you how to fix those mistakes, and from that, you'll learn the rules. So this is going to be a very interactive lesson, but it's a longer one, so make sure you have the time to commit. Of course, I'm Jennifer from jforrestenglish.com, and this channel is dedicated to helping you feel confident speaking English in public so you can take your career and your life to the next level. Now, before we go any further, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell icon so you're notified every time I post a new lesson. Now, let's dive in with this video. In this lesson, let's talk about formatting and punctuation. Now, we're going to talk about an email specifically, but what we're talking about in this lesson can be applied to any writing you do. So just remember, formatting and punctuation are not optional, and there are rules to follow, specific rules, and that's what we'll be reviewing today. So here is an example of an email, okay? Now, the content in this email is great. The grammar is perfect. There are no grammatical mistakes in this email. It is well written, it has a good idea, a nice flow, the vocabulary is very natural, everything is perfect, except the formatting and punctuation. Now, I know when you look at this email, there are some very obvious mistakes, right? And you might be like rolling your eyes because I'm giving you such a dramatic example, but I guarantee you, I receive emails that look like this from students all the time. They look terrible, okay? And sometimes I'm seeing these in a professional context, evaluating a student's ability for an IELTS exam or evaluating a student for a job. So I'm not just receiving these as Facebook messages, okay? These are professional messages that are lacking formatting and punctuation. So I want you to pause the video and identify as many errors as you can, all right? So just write them out on a separate piece of paper. Okay, I'm sure you were able to identify a lot of the errors, but probably not all of them. So now let's take a look at the formatting and punctuation rules, not guidelines, rules. The first rule has to do with capitalization. Capitalization is very important. Of course, capitalization is evident right here. This letter is bigger than the others. This letter is capitalized, okay? Now, this one I see all the time. And let me tell you, I want to throw out your email when I see it. It looks so unprofessional. I is always capitalized when it's a standalone word. So think of the subject I, right? Which is very, very common to use the subject I in written form, of course, in any form. Now, it is always capitalized. The subject I is never like this, okay? Never. There's no exceptions to this, always. Now, also, the I in contractions, I'm, I've, I'll, is always capitalized. So This I'm doesn't exist. It's wrong. It never exists. It's always capital I. All right? Now also, the first letter in a sentence is capitalized. And of course, you know when there's a sentence because it follows a period or it's the first word in an email or a new paragraph, right? Okay, so the first letter in a sentence is capitalized. You can see that here. F is the first letter in this sentence. T is the first letter in this sentence. I is the first letter in this sentence, all right? So here, this I is not capitalized because it's not a contraction of the subject I, right? It's the word it. So of course, this I is not capitalized. But if it was the beginning of a sentence, it was, and then that's your sentence, then of course it would be capitalized, right? Okay, and finally, names and proper nouns are capitalized. There will be an exercise in the practice exercises because whether or not a noun is a proper noun might be sometimes tricky to identify, okay? But of course, all names and proper nouns are capitalized. So looking at our email, highlighted are all of the punctuation mistakes with capitalization. Okay, so of course, this is a subject, I needs to be capitalized. Why does this need to be capitalized? Yeah, because it's the beginning of a sentence, right? Hilton is the name of a hotel and it's a proper noun. The Hilton. Orlando is the name of a city and it's a proper noun in Orlando. Okay, now of course, here you'll notice I already did the capitalization for these sentences properly. Now these are proper names, right? Sarah, George, and Maria. Of course, those need to be capitalized. And then this is a contraction with I as a subject, right? But even if that wasn't the rule, it's still the first letter in a sentence. So it's being capitalized regardless. If I'm was here in the middle of a sentence, it would still be capitalized. But regardless of what the first letter of the sentence is, it would always be capitalized. Okay, this is capitalized already, capitalized, and then my name obviously is a proper noun, so it's capitalized. Now notice here, Mr. is capitalized, Brown is the name, it's capitalized, and hi is capitalized because it's the first letter in a new sentence. Now let's take a look at periods, commas, and spacing. So every sentence ends with a period or another form of punctuation. So of course, a period is the dot, right? This is what? A comma. This is a comma, okay? This is a period. Now this is an exclamation point, and this is a question mark. Exclamation point, question mark, okay? So a sentence can end with a period, that's the most common, but it might end with an exclamation point if you really want to exaggerate an idea. Or, of course, if it's a question, you end it with a question mark. We don't end our sentences with commas, right? Ever. So it needs some form of punctuation. And also, there's only one single space after periods and commas. So here I showed you what a comma was, just in case. So periods and commas. There's one single space after. Now, specific to our formal titles, Mr., Mrs., Ms., Miss, we need a period after it, okay? Mr. Brown, Mrs. Brown, Miss Brown, Ms. Brown. So notice, period, there's one single space here, okay? And then we put a comma directly after the name. There's no space between the comma, and just like there's no space between the last letter of the word and the period, right? There's only a space between the period and the first letter of the next word. So this is the formatting of professional titles. Miss, period, one space, name with a capital letter, and the M is capitalized, right? Miss, capitalized, period, one space, Brown, capital B, and then a comma. Now, this is for your opening, but if you were closing, I could just say thanks, comma. Okay, there's a comma after your N. It could be regards, whatever your ending is, regards, thanks, one comma, no space, and then your name, okay? No period after my name, just my name. No comma, no period, nothing like that, okay? Now, I could say thanks, and I could sign my name, Miss, period, one space, Forrest. Now, I would never do that. We generally don't use this level of formality in North America business. It just looks weird to me. It looks like my grandmother's name. I would never do that. I use my first name. Thanks, Jennifer. Now let's take a look at the email. So here are all the areas where there were mistakes with periods, commas, and spacing. Okay, so here, what do we need? Period, one single space. The space was already there. It was just missing the period. And then a comma, okay? It's important, a comma. Now here, this period is floating. I see this quite a lot. There's a space here. That can't be it. The period has to be right beside the final word, and then there's one space, okay? So this my would have to be moved over to like here, because there'd only be one space. So this would have to be moved over. Now here, it's hard to kind of tell, but there actually is two spaces here. So this two just needs to be moved over one spot. And here we have our question mark, which is great because it's a question, but it's floating. It needs to be attached to Orlando, okay? So your punctuation is always attached to the word beside it. Here, same thing, floating, floating. This comma is floating. I see this a lot. So you have to attach it here and then leave one space. So there's already one space after. So when you move it over, make sure you don't create two spaces. So if you move this over, well then this would have to be moved over one as well. Sometimes I see students like just add an extra period randomly. I don't know why, but there's only one period needed, but it is attached, so that's good. This one, the period is missing. It seems minor, but trust me, a native speaker will notice this. And then here, thanks, comma, Jennifer, there's no period at the very end, okay? Even if it was Miss Forrest, there's no period after Forrest, okay? Now let's talk about missing commas. So a comma, it tells you to take a pause in the sentence. That's the purpose of a comma, okay? That's one use. We also use it between 3 or more items in a list. So if you only have 2 items, let's say you're going to the store and you need milk and bread. So milk, bread, 2 items. Now we don't use a comma. I don't say milk, bread. I use an and, milk and bread, no comma, okay? And then the and, of course, can be the ampersand, the and sign. Milk and bread, same thing. Now, we don't use the comma here, even though this would be a list of items. We only use it with 3 or more items in a list. And then also, commas separate ideas in a sentence. This is often with transition words. So when you get to the lesson on transition words, or if you've already watched it, just go back and pay attention to where the commas are, because they're there for a specific reason. They're not optional, okay? So let's take a look at this. On the other hand, comma, this is our transition word. On the other hand, our budget is set. Now, this is very much this, right? Because it tells me to take a pause. So let's take a look at our email here. So we have Sarah, George, Maria, 3 names. So our list is of 3. So what I need to do here is just add 1 comma. Sarah, George, and Maria. So let's take a look at this list. So here, notice, contracts already has a comma. Great. Batteries, but folders is the last item, right? So before folders, we should have and. I can't just have a comma. Contracts, batteries, and folders. So you need the and before the final item in the list. Now, you have 2 options. You can keep this comma here, but you absolutely need the and, okay? Or you can get rid of the final comma and just have the and. These are both acceptable, and it's really just a matter of personal preference. I find that personally, I use both pretty much interchangeably, and I don't really think about it. Just sometimes I add the extra comma, sometimes I don't. Okay, so let's take a look at this last one. This is a subtle point here, but there really should be a comma here, because think about it. We have 2 separate ideas. If you have any questions, let me know. These are our 2 separate ideas. And so I'm going to separate them with a comma. Now remember, there needs to be 1 single space after the comma. Okay, so notice I'll read this without the comma, which means I'm not going to take a pause. Remember, our comma tells us to take a pause. So I'll read it without the comma and with the comma, and you can tell me which one sounds better. If you have any questions, please let me know. So that's without a pause. Now with a pause. If you have any questions, please let me know. So it just adds that nice division between them, allowing me as your listener to hear both ideas. Now let's take a look at some other errors that I see students make quite commonly. I see a lot of just random spacing that doesn't really seem to make much sense. Inconsistent font size. So sometimes I see the font just change in the email. Half the email will be in 12-point font and the other half of the email will be in 14 font. That doesn't make any sense. So it should be consistent, and you should be using, for professional reasons, you should be using 12 or 14-point font size. Those are the standards. That's what your email is just defaulted as anyway. And then also obscure font. So obscure means weird font, like using a handwritten font or like a calligraphy font or like a comic book style font. No, you don't want to do that in a professional context. You use a boring font because it's easy to read, and it's not easy to read a handwritten font or a very decorative, pretty font with calligraphy. Those are not easy to read. The easiest fonts to read are Arial, Times New Roman, Georgia, and Verdana. These are the easiest, and these are the ones you should choose. And don't capitalize whole words, okay? This is because a native English speaker will read it like you're yelling that individual word, because that's why we use capitalization of the entire word, is to emphasize that word. But that's a dangerous thing to do in a business email, because you don't want to give the impression you're yelling at someone, or you're giving someone an order, or you're really angry. So you shouldn't do that in a professional email. And also, I see the wrong punctuation mark being used. So let's take a look at some of these in our email. So here they are highlighted. Okay, so here, 5 o'clock. This is the wrong punctuation mark. We need the ... for time, 5 o'clock. We don't use one period to tell time, okay? We use the double dots, ... to tell time. Now here, the mistake is random spacing. So all of a sudden, there's a big indent in this word. That's incorrect, okay? It needs to be flush against here. Now here, we have this punctuation mark. So here we need an apostrophe. This is a semicolon. We don't use a semicolon like this, okay? We need an apostrophe. This is a colon. The double dots is a colon. The one dot with the comma looking thing, this is a semicolon. So we need an apostrophe here. This is incorrect. And then notice, it's a subtle change, but notice both the font type and the font size are different in this line than the rest of the email. Now, sometimes this happens when you copy and paste one part of an email in from a different document. It maintains the font size and font type from where you copied and pasted it. So the best thing to do at the very end of your email, select all and change the font and the font size so it's consistent. Because sometimes the change of font is so subtle, you don't even really notice it. You know, this one, the font type is quite subtle. The font size, I would say, is quite obvious. Okay, here we're using a quotation mark, which we don't want. We just want an apostrophe. So one single line. The double line is a quotation mark. So when you put like an entire sentence in a quotation mark, like you're quoting someone, that's not what we want. You want one single line there, okay? And same here, that's a quotation mark, not an apostrophe. Oh, and notice here, now that we have it corrected, I left it with the comma and. But remember, I can get rid of the comma and it would be fine. Batteries and folders. Now, my advice to you is be consistent in one single email. So if this line, you're going to use a comma, well then in this line, you should also use a comma because they're so close together and your formatting should be consistent, okay? But they are both correct. And now, as if by pure magic alone, we were able to take this ugly email, which didn't contain any grammatical issues, but we added correct formatting and punctuation, and all of a sudden, we have this beautiful, well-formatted, and correct email. Doesn't that just look professional? Doesn't this look like something that would impress your boss or impress a future employer when you send in your resume and cover letter? And really, it only takes 2 minutes to check for formatting and punctuation before you hit the send button. Now, one little tip for you is simply use a spell checker that's automatically installed on your email system or your word processor. Because look, this is when I wrote the email, and this was in PowerPoint. So this was just the spell checker used in PowerPoint. And look, it already highlighted a lot of the errors. This is not me highlighting the errors. This is the spell checker doing it automatically. So it noticed that Mr. is wrong because there's no period, right? And then it noticed the punctuation. It noticed it was probably both the capitalization here. And here is the capitalization. Yeah. And that's capitalization, I would say. But notice that the spell checker didn't notice everything. It didn't notice the floating period. It didn't notice this big gap. It didn't notice that this isn't capitalized. So there's a lot that the spell checker didn't notice, but at least it will help you improve 50% of the errors. And then when you manually review it, it will only take you 1 minute instead of 2 minutes. Awesome job with this video. Formatting and punctuation are a very important part of your writing, because keep in mind, before someone even reads what you've submitted, first they look at it. And if they're not impressed with what they see just by looking at it, like if your resume visibly contains mistakes, they're not even going to read it, or they're already going to judge it negatively even before they read it. So it's really important that your writing has correct formatting and punctuation. So take the time, fix these mistakes, and you're going to impress anyone that reads your writing. Awesome job with this video. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and of course, subscribe. And until next time, happy studying.